Welcome back, grade 12 students, to the third lesson in our graphic user interface lesson series. In our last lesson, we set up the very basic building blocks of this cookie clicker style game. We added in a title, doesn't do anything, it just looks nice. Notice it looks much better than before. We have a cookie that can be clicked on, and then we have a label that updates every time that we click on it. Awesome. Now what we want to introduce is a second element to this, which is what's considered part of the idle element of this type of game, where you're actually able to step away from your keyboard or your mouse and have the game still progress on its own. It's kind of a fun mechanic to have for those who don't have a ton of time to play. You kind of get things set up and you come back with some progress being gained. So we are going to be creating a button over on the left side of the screen here. And inside of this button, I'm going to edit the text to say, oops, auto clicker cost being 10. This button, the way that it's supposed to work is if I have 10 cookies or more, then I can buy an auto clicker for a 10 cookie cost. So the 10 cookies that costs is going to be subtracted from my cookies owned, and then I'm going to get an auto clicker enabled, meaning that even if I don't do anything, it's going to consider that the cookie is being clicked on automatically every so often, whatever I program that amount in. Then I'm going to extend the functionality to update to say cost 20, meaning the next time I run this, it's going to cost a bit more. But when I buy this again, when I have enough cookies, then it's going to increase the rate at which the cookies are automatically clicked. And the more I buy this, the faster my cookies owned is going to increment on its own without me having to actually click on anything or do anything. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to change this variable here. Let's call this the auto clicker. And let's add an event, an action performed event. I'm just going to collapse in here all of this code that I can't do anything with. And in here, my auto clicker action performed, I want this to be able to do some things for me. So let's think through how we need to set this up here. I only want this to be able to actually do something if I own enough cookies. So I'm going to start with 10 cookies, but we're going to make this more generalized. And so what we're going to be doing here is I'm going to add in a private integer. I'm going to call this the auto trigger. I'm going to set it off as starting as equal to 10. So this auto trigger, my auto click, can only be triggered when it's above this value or more, when my count is above this value or more. So in my auto clicker, I'm going to say if my count is greater than or equal to my auto trigger value, then you can actually perform the functionality that we're talking about here. Now, what is it that I want it to be able to update? Well, if it costs 10, which is the value of my auto trigger, I want that value subtracted from my cookies owned. So I've already checked, do I have enough cookies to get it? And if I do, I need to subtract. Right now, in my counter update, I don't have an ability to subtract. One thing that I'm going to add to my functionality here is an override of this method. Sorry, I'm going to sip of water here really quick. I'm going to be creating another counter update. Now, Java doesn't like it when we use the same name. However, I am allowed to use the same method name if I have a different set of parameters. So I'm going to be passing in this call int change. That means if I run counter update with no parameters, then it will run this method. And if I run or access counter update with an int parameter, it will run this method. So I want to counter update, but depending on how I want it to update, here's what's going to happen. So in this case, in our first one, it only is going to increment it by 1. In this case, I want count to be incremented or decremented by change amount. If change is negative, then this will become a subtraction. So it's going to change it. In the case here, I put in minus 10, subtract 10 from it. So then I want to be able to actually change the text, cookies owned plus count. It will update setting the text of my cookie count up to date with the new information that it's got. And so now I can think about going back up here and continuing to add in my information. I'm going to run this counter update method, and inside of it, I am going to say minus auto trigger. Let's make sure we understand what this means. This is the amount that the auto trigger costs to engage to get this kind of running. You can set up the logic here with a Boolean, with some switch statement. I decided to do it this way just because it came to my mind in the first case. Maybe I'll refactor this later, but for now, auto trigger is 10. So if I have more than 10 cookies available, then I can actually run this code, and I'm going to say, hey, I'm spending these 10 cookies. Subtract that 10, counter update it, subtract it from the total count, and then update the display there. All right, so let's just run this program and see what happens right now, just to see if our functionality is working in the first place. So if I click this right now, nothing happens. If I get up to 10 and I click it, it goes back down to 0. Perfect. So that means that it's working properly. If I go up a bit over 10, I click it, it goes down to 6. Click it again, it doesn't work. All right, so my condition is working here. It's updating, but this seems kind of like a pointless mechanic right now, because if I get up to 10, I spend my cookies and I get nothing for it. And who would want to waste cookies? So we need to consider, what is it that we're adding into this to be able to make our functionality have some new mechanic running. And what we're actually going to be doing here is adding in something new. I'm going to add a new custom method here called a timer. I'm just going to outline a couple methods for us and explain how we set these up. For the most part, you are going to, in your own projects, follow along with this methodology, because timers have a couple little quirks to them that we have to follow pretty strictly. And this way will work really nicely to avoid any issues that can pop up in NetBeans holding temporary information in strange ways. So let's just put this in as a public for now. I'm going to create a method called startTimer. And this is going to set my timer going. And what the idea behind a timer is that it's going to access our system clock. And it's going to think in actually milliseconds is the main way we're going to reference things. And every certain number of milliseconds, it's going to run a piece of code on a set timer. You can have it run once as kind of like a scheduled reminder, or you can have it run infinitely every however often that you say to perform some kind of a task. Maybe you want to have a message flash every 5 seconds as a kind of an animation. Or maybe you want to have some kind of a game mechanic only be enabled once every 10 seconds for 5 seconds. A timer can help you with that. In our game, what we're going to be doing is, once we've bought this auto clicker, it's going to, every given amount of time, we're going to say every second probably to start, get a cookie automatically. So how do we set up this timer? Well, we have to import our timer. So Control-Shift-I to import it. And I'm going to create just a private timer. We'll call this my timer that we can reference later if we need to. And now within this timer class, I am going to, when I start a timer, create a whole brand new timer. I'm going to say that my timer equals a new timer. That means such a new one. Oh, but I don't have a return value here yet. Return timer. What we'll see here, if we highlight over this, is the other piece of information that we need, an action listener. This is something that we need to be able to link this to actually have the timer be set up properly. So I need to actually take my timer, and what we're going to be doing is scheduling in that means it's giving me an atypical error here. it automatically imported the a different type of timer. This is the one that we want to use. This is something I'm glad we kind of came across in this tutorial here. We want the Java Util timer, not the JavaX. It's kind of a different library with its own different set of custom methods. We're going to go with the normal built-in Java timer based off of its core set of libraries. So this is what we're actually going to work with. And so now down here, this is going to work as expected. So if you try and do your Control-Shift-I import and it gives you a JavaX import, we're going to have some issues with the current strategy that we're using. So great thing to notice, maybe typing in the import yourself will have to be how this works for now. And in fact, I'm going to look ahead and import another class that we're going to need, util.timerTask. Just in case it imports the JavaX one instead, we want the normal Java util library version of it. So make sure that you have these located in your projects. Awesome. Okay, so now with this timer that I'm making, now I have access, okay, perfect, to the methods that I'm looking for, schedule. And what this does is it sets up well, there's a few different methods that we can call here, but the basic one that we want to run is it's going to set up which one should we run here? The timer task. So the timer task simply just means what it is that we want it to do, with the code that we want performed on that schedule. And then we're going to say the initial delay before it starts, and then the delay for each time after that it waits. And these will be put in milliseconds that you'll see down here, the delay in milliseconds. So this is the method that we want to be referencing. Now, we don't actually have a timer task created yet. We need to create a timer task, but one of the ways, the way that we're going to instantiate it here, I'm actually going to create a custom method to do it for us. It's just going to make things nice and clean in our code. So we're going to take a new public method, and we're going to return a timer task object. Call this method set timer task, not with a 0, with a closed bracket. And in here, we're going to create a new timer task. We have imported this up here, so we should see the imports working properly. But this is not sufficient information to be able to initiate this timer task. We actually have to throw in some extra override information. It's expecting something a little bit different than our normal constructors are asking for. And in this, what I need to do is I need to run an override, which is going to take the run method that is built in to the swing library, and we're going to be kind of taking over it in a local override here, and then running something different. In this case, we are going to run counter update. And then we actually have to close off the block of code here in the instantiation of this timer task. And then I'm going to return this timer task to whoever requests it. Up here, I'm going to be running my set timer task method and getting my timer task returned to me. Let's make sure we understand what this timer task is doing. It is going to run whatever code is between these blocks. In this case, we want to update our counter in the simple way of just incrementing it by 1. You can add different functionality later, but this is the code that we want to run. Whenever the timer reaches the point at which it runs, it checks with the timer task for what to do. And this is how we set up the timer task and embed it within the scheduling of our timer. Now, these width variables are misrepresenting the information here. We need an amount of milliseconds to be able to delay and initialize our task. So I'm just going to keep it simple here, and we're going to make sure our code is nicely generalized. Up top here, I'm going to set a new int for my, I'm going to call this refresh delay, the delay between refreshing or creating a new cookie. And we're going to set this to be 1,000. 1,000 milliseconds is 1 second. And so in here, we are going to just use this information. You can always customize this more later if you want. Here's how this is playing out logically. The timer that I'm creating, it is going to schedule an event to happen. What event? A counter update. When will it run? Well, as soon as this runs, it's going to wait refresh delay time based on the system clock in order to run, which is 1 second. So after 1 second, it will run this. And then refresh delay later, or 1 second later, it will run it again. Refresh delay later, it will run it again. And that's going to keep on running it until something tells it to stop or gets in the way of doing it for some reason. So this is how we get our timer set up and operating here. Now we need to go back into our auto clicker action performed. When we click on and buy our auto clicker appropriately, we need to initialize this timer and get it going. Here's where we have one other layer that we have to go with here. I'm going to just set my timer to be start timer. Start timer runs the method, which is going to initialize the timer, the start task, and get everything running. So by just running this, everything goes up and running. You might be wondering why I simply don't just run the method without assigning it to something. Well, I need to actually be able to control when this timer stops. And the best way to do that in NetBeans, as far as I have been able to figure out so far, is to actually nullify that object before it runs again. Because there's going to be a problem that if we run the code just like this, each time I'm able to buy this auto clicker upgrade, it's going to create another timer of the same name. And those timers are going to start to pile up on each other and interfere. It might cause it to run faster than it should. It might cause there to be an actual crash in our program. I only want one running at a time. We do have a method in here for canceling, but that doesn't prevent us from still having this object remembered in memory and still causing some interference. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to nullify. We're going to erase all the content of this. So as far as the heap in Java is concerned, this doesn't exist anymore. And then we're going to reinstantiate it by running our start timer. So each time we run this, we are, what if there was a timer there before? And even if there wasn't, we still have an empty my timer. We're just kind of setting it, it's already null. We're setting it to null again. No problem, that will work just fine. And each time we're kind of clearing the stack so that we can create a new timer based off of the new information just fine. So what we have now is the ability to set a timer. It's a pretty simple timer. Let's see how this works. Let's get this up to 10. Auto clicker. And now each second, you'll see the cookies going up on their own. I'll move my mouse up the screen there so you can see that it is going up all on its own. In the next and final tutorial, I'll be showing us how to have a bit more customization on this button, and then we're going to add in one more element with a timer set to some information being given about the progress of another power-up in our world, just to really get a sense of different types of interactions that we can use. Notice I can still click while the timer is going. It works along in tandem. Awesome. Okay, we'll add our last set of functionality in the next video.